those lag between 8 and 15 months. So this stuff is going to keep falling because of how the calculations are well into 2024 and into 2025. Again, my calculations put core inflation at 0 or negative next summer.
Wow.
Maybe I'm a bit early, but by this time next year, core inflation is going to be at 0. It's kind of baked in the mathematical cake. So that's how I see it. So just over time, these numbers will keep coming lower.
According to Raoul Pal, the fact that overall jobs expanded a bit faster than expected doesn't suggest that the economy is ramping up and inflation is going to spike again soon. Rather, it mostly speaks to the difficulty in predicting month-to-month movements. There's good reason, perhaps, that economics is sometimes called the dismal science. We aren't always that good at saying with certainty what will happen over the short term. Monthly data has its place in making assessments and guiding policy for sure. However, focusing on just one month can be misleading as the data can be quite volatile. The underlying trends are what matters more, and that is where we see signs of a slowdown. In 2022, labor demand, as measured by job openings plus non-farm employment, exceeded labor supply as measured by the labor force. In other words, there were more job openings than people willing to fill the positions. As a result, we saw labor earnings increase by 5.1% relative to 2021. Great news for employees, but less so for the Federal Reserve. Higher wages combined with supply chain disruptions and the effect of war in Ukraine meant that the inflation rate, as measured by Consumer Price Index growth, rose 7.7% in 2022. Let us now get into the video as Raoul Pal breaks down these concepts and reveals why he thinks inflation will be down to 0 by 2024. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your questions and comments. Enjoy.
The recession everybody is expecting is probably playing out, but it was priced in last year. Right, the markets don't go down 75% in crypto without it pricing in the economic cycle. The equity markets fell 30, 35%. Long end of tech fell 70%. So we had it priced in last year. So then the market starts pricing in. So liquidity started picking up in June of last year. And that's when I started adding to my ETH bets into that big sell-off in ETH, where ETH made its low. Then the confirmation of my forward-looking indicators was that October was another liquidity event where liquidity was rising, but the markets was having its last spasm. So again, I kind of added into that bet, added technology names as well, and was adding all the way through. So for me, looking forwards, we're now getting the bits that I've been waiting for. You see, I live in the future. I'm used forward-looking indicators. So they're looking at things in advance, the economic data in advance, kind of a glimpse into the future. But now that data's catching up, which is inflation is going down. Unemployment is slowly rising. The economy is slowing down. And that means the Fed soon stop raising rates. It means that eventually they cut rates and eventually maybe they use quantitative easing. We're also going into an election year. An election year tends to have stimulus because they want to get elected, so they bribe everybody with money. So we've got this kind of nexus of stimulus that's likely to come between the back end of this year, 2024, 2025. I've been working on something called the Everything Code as well, which I think I've spoken to the Banter audience about as well. And that's basically the idea that what the central banks are doing with quantitative easing is printing money to pay the interest on the debt from the previous kind of debt cycle. So every 3.5 years, same as the Bitcoin halving cycle, is this economic cycle driven by government debts and how they roll them every kind of 3.5 years, because they're all 3 to 5 year debts. We're about to come into the period where they have to monetize the pandemic payments, and they were massive. And they can't do it with interest rates where they are now. So what they're hoping is that they can get inflation to undershoot. They are not stupid, the central banks. They obviously know the forward-looking indicators are falling on everything, but they want an inflation undershoot because they need to be able to cut rates low enough that they can refi the debt and then put it onto the balance sheet. So that means, in layman's terms, starting from the back end of this year, the last quarter, let's call it kind of November, December period, there's going to be more cowbell. And cowbell is my kind of tagline for stimulus. That's whether it's the printing of money starts or that starts then, or cutting of rates, because they need to be able to service the debt. There's $13 trillion of debts that come up for renewal, plus the new debt that they're issuing. So it's an enormous amount for the markets to digest, and the only way of doing it is this.
To tame inflation, the Fed embarked on a program of aggressive interest rate hikes. This resulted in a general economic slowdown by the beginning of 2023. The housing market cooled. Construction and related markets slowed. But now labor supply is outpacing labor demand. More people are looking for jobs than there are openings. Raoul Pal further comments on the BRICS settlement and why he thinks they are very far off from achieving a tangible goal. He states that every debt is pegged to the dollar, and going away from the dollar means crashing your economy. Let us now hear from Raoul Pal.
And Europe, right? Europe's super slow. They're getting towards the end of their rate hike cycle. We're starting to see the economies that led the rate hike cycle cutting. So that was actually, weirdly, this time around, it was Brazil and Chile and a bunch of others. They've all started cutting rates. So the rate cutting cycle has started globally, and we will just see more and more countries in the rate cutting cycle. The Europeans will need to stimulate at some point. They're going to finish their cycle. Inflation, they'll do the same thing. They'll try and make sure inflation is absolutely going to undershoot their target of 2%. The US will do the same. The UK will do the same. And then it's all on for stimulus again, because they need to repay this debt. The only way of doing it is shunting it onto the balance sheet of the central bank at lower interest rates. Everybody is in debt in US dollars. They actually need dollars. The system does not survive. 85% of world trade is in dollars, 87%, and something like 70% of global debts are in dollars. So they don't have a choice. If China stopped trading in dollars, their entire economy will blow up overnight. So it's never going to happen. But they do want to get away from the US using the dollar as a weapon. So here we've got a dichotomy. Yes, they want to get away from the US using it as a weapon, but they keep cutting off Iran, and they cut off Russia, and they cut off whoever they feel like cutting off. So I think overall, the BRICS is something, but it's not something big. It's something we've known about for ages. They've always tried to self-organize to be able to do stuff. They've been talking about this for a decade, and it's not really worked. And the reality is however much they say they want to move away from the dollar, they can't. What is Saudi Arabia going to do with Chinese yuan apart from spend it on Chinese goods? You need the world is more complicated than a lot of people have you believe. And these narratives come from people who want the dollar to decline. The dollar's in a structural bull market and has been for quite some time now because of the global debts. Over time, we will see different things take a slice of the dollar market. I think they should be able to trade with each other in their own currencies, and they will do. I think also the rise of cryptocurrencies fits in with that. I think there's a bunch of things. But, we talk about de-dollarization, and on the other side, we see stable coins, the biggest application of crypto. And that's allowing average people to get hold of dollars, right?
Yeah.
It's just a tokenized dollar.
So
nobody really wants to get rid of dollars.
Based on the first 7 months of data in 2023, wage growth has slowed to 3.4% compared to 2022, as has general inflation slowing to 3.5%. So where is the economy heading? The preponderance of the data is pointing to a general economic slowdown. As a result, some suggest the U.S. economy may be heading for a soft landing, where inflation rates reach 2% to 2.5% as the U.S. avoids recession. But when it comes to the chances of recession, the economy is not quite out of the woods yet. True, inflation is trending down, but earnings have generally grown slower than inflation, resulting in a loss of purchasing power for consumers. Less cash to spend on goods doesn't appear to have hit the economy yet. Consumer spending in the first 7 months of 2023 was up 1.9% on the previous year. However, there is evidence that a lot of this was due to consumers purchasing on credit. Credit card debt reached a staggering $1.3 trillion in the second quarter of 2023. This is not sustainable. At some point soon, consumer spending will have to slow. And given that consumer spending represents about 2/3 of total GDP, a recession could still occur. Last week, the bloc of nations known as the BRICS took the historic step of inviting 6 new countries for membership. The grouping of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa will be joined by Saudi Arabia, Iran, Ethiopia, the United Arab Emirates, Argentina, and Egypt as part of an expanded collective. But these 6 new entrants are among dozens of countries that have expressed interest in joining the BRICS. Further expansions of an organization many have touted as a systemic rival to the G7 seem almost certain to follow in future summits. Scholars and analysts have been discussing the rise of the Global South for decades, especially since the 2008 financial crisis, pointing to how the unprecedented and sustained economic growth of many countries outside the West was redistributing global power. Researchers have also concluded that while the global economy's center of gravity was in the Atlantic, between the US and Europe in 1980, it had moved 4,800 miles, 7,725 kilometers, to Izmir, Turkey by 2008 and will likely lie somewhere between India and China by 2050. Do you think Raoul Pal is making a correct prediction, or is this just delusional? Is a 0% interest possible by next summer? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Also, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.